What happens when a teacher tries to embarrass a quiet student, only to discover she has just challenged a hidden genius? No one in room 207 expected anything unusual that morning. It felt like any other boring school day. But by the end of math class, one student would change how an entire room saw her, how a teacher saw herself, and how silence could sometimes hide brilliance far greater than noise. The steady buzz of middle school voices echoed through the hallway as students shuffled into room 207 at Sylview Middle School in Cleveland, Ohio. Backpacks hit the floor, chairs scraped loudly, friends laughed, complained, and groaned about having math first period. For most 7th graders, math class was something to survive, not enjoy. Today seemed no different, or at least that is what everyone thought. Near the back of the room sat a small girl with her head lowered. Her pencil tapped lightly against her desk in a steady rhythm. Her name was Alyssa Daniels. She was 12 years old and had mastered something few students ever learned so young. She knew how to disappear. Alyssa blended into the background so well that most teachers barely remembered her face. She did not raise her hand. She did not speak unless spoken to. She followed rules, turned in homework, and avoided attention like it was dangerous. Years of being overlooked had taught her that staying invisible felt safer than being noticed. Teachers rarely called on her. Classmates barely spoke to her. Alyssa did not complain. She simply stayed quiet and observed the world from her desk in the back. But there was something about Alyssa that no one had seen yet, something she kept carefully hidden. Her notebooks were not just filled with notes from class. In the margins, between assignments and doodles, were complex math problems far beyond 7th grade level. Algebra, systems of equations, advanced concepts she solved for fun. Math was not a struggle for her. It was comfort. It made sense in a way people often did not. Math class that day was taught by Mrs. Grant. She was everything Alyssa was not. Loud, sharp, confident. At 42 years old, Mrs. Grant was known throughout the school for her strict style and cutting honesty. She believed students needed pressure to succeed. She believed kindness without discipline led to failure. Some students respected her, many feared her, few felt comfortable around her. That morning, frustration sat heavy on Mrs. Grant's face as she stood at the front of the room. She scanned the rows of slouched students staring blankly at their desks. She sighed loudly and picked up a worksheet. "This," she said, waving the paper in the air, "is basic algebra. Basic." Her voice was sharp enough to silence side conversations instantly. "And yet half of you still cannot figure it out." She dropped the worksheet onto her desk with a loud slap. "I have been teaching this for weeks, and I am still seeing the same mistakes." She folded her arms and shook her head. "What is it going to take for you all to care?" Alyssa kept her eyes on her notebook. She was not scared exactly, but she hated moments like this, moments when attention felt unpredictable. She pretended to review her work, hoping not to be noticed. Mrs. Grant began pacing across the front of the classroom. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile floor. "You are going to see these questions on tests, on exams, possibly for the rest of your academic lives, and if you do not understand them now, you are setting yourselves up for failure." Her eyes swept across the room, lingering on each student just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then her gaze stopped. Miss Daniels, Alyssa's head lifted suddenly, her stomach tightened, the room felt very quiet. "You have been awfully silent back there," Mrs. Grant said. "Let us see if you are paying attention." Alyssa felt heat rush to her face as every student turned to look at her. She wanted to disappear. She nodded slightly. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered, but Mrs. Grant was not finished. She turned to the board, grabbed a piece of chalk, and began writing quickly. The equation stretched across the board, long and complicated. Variables, exponents, multiple steps. It looked nothing like the worksheet they had been working on. Students gasped quietly. A few laughed nervously. Someone whispered, "What is that?" It looked like something meant for high school. "Maybe college." Mrs. Grant stepped aside and gestured toward the board. "Solve it?" For a moment, Elisa did not move. The room seemed to hold its breath. Whispers started again. No way. She is done. That is impossible. Mrs. Grant crossed her arms. A faint smirk played on her lips. Well, she said impatiently, any time now, or do you need a calculator? A few students chuckled. Elisa barely heard them. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was already working. She stood slowly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. It was not confidence that pushed her forward. It was something deeper, something she had been holding inside for years. She walked to the front of the room and picked up the chalk. It felt cold in her fingers. The classroom fell silent. Elisa studied the equation. Numbers and symbols shifted in her mind, lining up in a way that felt familiar. She raised the chalk and began to write. At first, no one understood what she was doing. The steps looked scattered, confusing, but as the board filled, something changed. Patterns began to appear. Her movements were calm and steady. She broke the problem apart, piece by piece, rebuilding it into something clear. Mrs. Grant's smirk faded. She stepped closer, her arms slowly uncrossing. Her eyes followed every step Elisa wrote. The only sound in the room was the chalk scratching against the board. Halfway through, the whispers stopped. Students stared. Why? Died. Elisa did not rush. She did not hesitate. This was not new to her. Nights spent solving problems alone. Weekends reading advanced math books from the library. All of it lived in her hands now. Mrs. Grant cleared her throat. Interesting, she muttered, though her voice wavered. Elisa continued. The final steps were the most complex. She paused briefly, checking her work. Then she wrote the final answer, circled it, and stepped back. The board was full. The solution was clear. Elisa turned to face the room. Her hands were dusty with chalk. Her breathing was steady. Mrs. Grant stared at the board. She traced the steps with her finger, her lips moving silently. She checked again and again. There were no mistakes. Silence stretched across the room. Finally, Mrs. Grant turned to Elisa. How? She began, then stopped. She shook her head slightly. How did you know how to do that? Elisa shifted her weight. I study, she said softly. It made sense once I broke it down. Mrs. Grant blinked. You study on your own. Elisa nodded. I like math. Murmurs spread through the room. Students whispered in disbelief. The quiet girl in the back was not invisible anymore. Mrs. Grant faced the class. Take a moment, she said. What you just saw was real understanding, not memorization, not guessing. This is talent. Applause started slowly, then grew louder. Elisa felt her face burn. She smiled, small and unsure. Something inside her shifted, not pride over proving someone wrong, but pride in finally being seen. Mrs. Grant raised her hand slowly, signaling the class to quiet down. The applause faded, but the energy in the room did not. It felt different now, charged in a way none of the students had experienced before. Elisa stood at the front of the class, unsure of what to do with her hands, still holding the chalk loosely between her fingers. Elisa, Mrs. Grant said, her voice firm but no longer sharp, why have you never shown this before? Why have you never spoken up? Elisa hesitated. Every pair of eyes was on her again, but this time it felt different. Less threatening, still uncomfortable, but not cruel. I didn't think anyone would care, she said quietly. I didn't want to be wrong. The room went quiet again. Mrs. Grant's expression softened, something Elisa had never seen before. She nodded slowly, as if those words had landed somewhere deep. Well, Mrs. Grant said, you were wrong about one thing. We care, and I should have noticed sooner. Elisa returned to her seat, her legs feeling unsteady. As she sat down, students leaned toward each other, whispering, that was crazy. She solved it like it was nothing. I didn't even know she talked. Elisa stared at her desk, her heart still racing. She wanted to shrink back into her quiet corner, but she could feel eyes on her now. Curious eyes, respectful ones. Mrs. Grant tried to continue the lesson, but it was clear her mind was elsewhere. She glanced back at the board more than once, then back at Elisa, as if confirming what had just happened was real. The bell rang sooner than anyone expected. Chairs scraped back. Students grabbed their bags, still buzzing with excitement. As they filed out, many glanced at Elisa, a few smiled, one girl gave her a thumbs up. Elisa wasn't sure how to respond. "Elisa," Mrs. Grant called out, "can you stay for a moment?" The whispers returned as the room emptied. Elisa sat still, clutching her notebook tightly. When the last student left, the door closed softly behind them. Mrs. Grant walked over and sat on the edge of her desk. She no longer looked intimidating. She looked thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," she said. Elisa blinked. "An apology?" "Yes," Mrs. Grant said. "I underestimated you. I saw quiet and assumed average. That was my mistake." Elisa did not know what to say. No teacher had ever spoken to her like this before. "You are extraordinary," Mrs. Grant continued, "not just because you solved that problem, but because of how you think. That kind of thinking is rare." Elisa looked down at her notebook. "I didn't think it mattered." "It matters," Mrs. Grant said firmly, "and it always has." She paused, then added, "There are programs, math clubs, competitions, opportunities that could challenge you. I want to help you reach them." The idea made Elisa nervous. Excited, scared, all at once. "I will think about it," Elisa said. Mrs. Grant smiled. "That is all I ask." Elisa walked out into the hallway, her notebook pressed to her chest. The noise of students faded into the background as her thoughts replayed the moment again and again. The chalk, the silence, the applause. At lunch, students approached her. Some asked how she learned math like that. Others just said congratulations. Elisa answered quietly, but inside she felt something new. Confidence. That evening at home, Elisa sat at the kitchen table with her parents. She hesitated before telling them everything. But when she did, their faces lit up with pride. "We always knew you were capable," her mother said, squeezing her hand. "This is just the beginning," her father added. Later that night, Elisa opened her notebook. The blank page no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a future. She began to write again, not just equations, but dreams. Elisa sat on her bed later that night, her notebook open across her knees. The house was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator drifted faintly from the kitchen. Her parents thought she was doing homework, and in a way, she was. But this felt different from any homework she had ever done before. She stared at the page for a long time before writing anything. For years, this notebook had been a place where she hid, a place where she poured out thoughts she never shared and solved problems no one ever saw. Tonight it felt like something else. It felt like permission. She wrote equations, at first familiar ones that calmed her nerves. Then she paused. Beneath the numbers she wrote a sentence, something she had never written before. "What if I did not hide?" The words felt strange, almost dangerous, but also freeing. The next morning at school, Elisa walked into room 207 with the same backpack, the same clothes, the same quiet steps. But something inside her had changed. She still took her seat near the back, but she sat a little straighter. She listened a little closer. Mrs. Grant noticed immediately. Throughout the lesson, her eyes drifted toward Elisa more than once. Not with suspicion, with interest. When a question was asked, Elisa hesitated, then raised her hand slightly. Mrs. Grant called on her without hesitation. Elisa answered correctly. A few students turned to look at her. No laughter followed, no whispers of disbelief, just nods. Over the next few days, things slowly shifted. Teachers began to notice Elisa more. Students asked for her help. She still spoke softly, still preferred quiet corners, but she no longer felt invisible. Mrs. Grant kept her promise. She brought Elisa information about math clubs and local competitions. She challenged her with harder problems. She pushed her, but never in a way that felt cruel. It felt like belief. One afternoon, after class, Mrs. Grant handed Elisa a thick packet of papers. "I know this looks intimidating," she said, "but I also know you can handle it." Elisa smiled, a real smile this time. "Thank you." At home, her parents noticed the change too. Elisa talked more at dinner. She shared ideas, she asked questions, they listened amazed and proud. Weeks passed, then months. Elisa entered her first math competition. She was nervous, her hands shook. But when the problems were placed in front of her, everything else faded away. She focused, she solved, she trusted herself. She did not win first place, but she did not mind. She had stepped forward. That was the real victory. The quiet girl from the back of the room was still quiet, still thoughtful, still shy, but she was no longer hiding. Mrs. Grant often reflected on that day in room 207, the day she tried to make a point and instead learned one. She learned that talent does not always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting to be invited. Elisa's story spread quietly through the school. Teachers spoke differently, they looked closer. They listened more, and Elisa kept writing, kept solving, kept dreaming. Her story was not just about math, it was about being seen, about believing that your voice matters, even when it is soft, about understanding that sometimes one moment is all it takes to change everything. Because brilliance does not always shine loudly, sometimes it waits patiently until someone dares to step forward and let it be known, and maybe that is the real lesson. Never underestimate the quiet ones. And never underestimate yourself. Your potential has always been there, waiting.